So Netflix has a very hot new rom-com series called Nobody Wants This, and it's a modern take on a forbidden-ish love story. The show follows a newly single and hot rabbi who falls for an LA podcaster, complicated by the fact that she's not Jewish. But did you know that the show originally had a different title? Stars of the show, Adam Brody and Kristen Bell, were interviewed on Dax Shepard's podcast to promote Nobody Wants This, and revealed they were going to originally call the show Shiksa, but ran into a problem.
Lo and behold, and to our surprise, nobody knows the word shiksa.
Yes, apparently in the focus groups, not enough people, if any people, knew the word shiksa.
So it seems that many people are not familiar with the term and maybe only heard about it through Nobody Wants This. So let's do a deep dive into the word shiksa, its shtetl origins, how the meaning has changed over time through literature, film, and TV, and its controversial use in Nobody Wants This that are inspiring think pieces all across the web.
You've got shiksa appeal. Jewish men love the idea of meeting a woman that's not like their mother.
Oh, that's insane.
So what is the literal definition or translation of the word shiksa? The term shiksa is a Yiddish word. Yiddish was the primary language of Ashkenazi Jews, so Jews who were living in Central and Eastern Europe by the 10th century. There's a lot of debate about the language's origins, but it's generally believed to be a hybrid of Hebrew and German. The closest origin for the Yiddish word shiksa is most likely the Hebrew term sheketz, meaning abomination, impure, or object of loathing. Transitioning from Hebrew into Yiddish, sheketz became shegetz. Shiksa is basically the feminine version of the term shegetz, with the feminine suffix ah. In the Talmud, commenting on interactions with so-called shekets, the passage reads, "Let him not marry the daughter of an unlearned and unobservant man, for they are an abomination, and their wives a creeping thing." So basically saying, don't marry anyone who's not Jewish, and that non-Jewish women are like bugs, so not a very flattering start. In Yiddish literature, the archetype of a shiksa shows up in folktales in two primary forms. One, as an unattractive and older hag, and second, as a young seductress or temptress. The seductress or temptress archetype has lived on much more than the hag one. One example of the seductress archetype in Yiddish literature is Lady and the Peddler. Kind of like Hansel and Gretel if Hansel was an adult Jewish salesman and the witch was a hot shiksa woman. Because basically, as they're dating, she attempts to eat him. Another example is Monish, which is about a young Torah prodigy. He falls for a hot blonde shiksa and then falls into a hell-like place because of it. That's pretty harsh considering we don't even really believe in hell, but whatever version we have, he's there. These Yiddish stories have a very clear message about dating a shiksa. Just don't do it. But why? Well, beyond the passage in the Talmud, interfaith marriages had very real consequences in the shtetls. Marrying outside of the Jewish faith back then meant that you were ousted from the community. Like, you were dead to them. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. Like, they would mourn you as if you died. Like, sit, shiva, and everything. It's a level of pettiness almost unheard of nowadays. So, what is the appeal then of falling for a shiksa? Well, a general rule is that forbidden stuff is hot, like Romeo falling for Juliet, or a rabbi falling for an LA shiksa podcaster. These stories try to address this, being like, hey, I get the appeal, but you need to find a nice Jewish girl and settle down, or else the shiksa might eat you. I want to note as well that shiksa sometimes had multiple meanings depending on the region. In Poland, for example, it was a word for an immature young girl or teenage girl, like calling someone a snot-nosed brat. So let's travel, as many Jews did, to America, where the meaning of shiksa began to change from impure seductress to the definition we know today. Or, as Rabbi Noah puts it, a hot, blonde, non-Jew. So the term shiksa is actually woven into film history. 1927's The Jazz Singer became the first talkie feature to become a financial success. The Jazz Singer follows Jackie Rabinowitz, a fifth-generation cantor. And if you don't know what a cantor sings and leads congregants in prayer. But Jackie dreams instead of becoming a jazz singer, so basically he has to be like,
I want to win your dream. No, Dad. I want to win yours.
When he writes home to his parents while he's touring, his mother dramatically laments that maybe he's fallen in love with a shiksa. If you're wondering if The Jazz Singer was the movie that did blackface, unfortunately, yes. If you're also wondering if the 1980s version avoided doing blackface, unfortunately, no. Let's move on. Many Ashkenazi Jews moved to the United States between the 1880s and the 1920s, so over time we start getting more second and third generation Jewish Americans who have began to assimilate into general American culture. And so the divide between Jewish and Gentile became less about religion and language divide, and more about cultural differences and quirks. One of Lenny Bruce's most famous stand-up sets goes into this.
Kool-Aid, goyish. Very good. Instant potatoes, scary goyish.
This is a bit that never really dies.
Arriving late or arriving early?
I'm going to say arriving late is Jewish. We intended to be on time, but things came up.
That's right.
We start to see for American Jews the conflict of to assimilate or not to assimilate to be one of the biggest themes in Jewish media. I hate saying Jewish media. It makes me feel like I'm saying Jews control the media, which I promise we don't. If we did do that, do you really think we'd have to pad Hanukkah movie recommendation lists with the Rugrats Hanukkah special? Also, I don't care if Adam Sandler is Jewish. I consider the movie 8 Crazy Nights to be a hate crime. Anyways, if we had to pick one man who changed the definition of shiksa to more closely model the one we know today, it would have to be American Jewish author Philip Roth.
I hear you're reading Goodbye Columbus?
Yes, I felt that Goodbye Columbus would be the best Philip Roth for the kids.
Uh-huh. Because I feel the best Philip Roth for kids is no Philip Roth.
I think they're going to gain a unique understanding of how Jewish men, particularly in their 20s, are this just very specific mix of sexual bravado and extreme self-hatred, and it can be really destructive to the girls they choose to f***.
In 1969, Philip Roth published Portnoy's Complaint. The book is basically an ongoing monologue by the Jewish main character, Alexander Portnoy, to his psychoanalyst. This book broke Philip Roth into the mainstream for both Jewish audiences and non-Jewish audiences, and the book itself became quite famous and controversial due to its very explicit sexual content. I don't really want to go into it, but if you know the American Pie scene with the pie, just switch the pie out with liver and you get the gist. In the book, Portnoy expresses a near obsession with sleeping with shiksas. But the shiksas, are something else again. How did they get so gorgeous, so healthy, so blonde? My contempt for what they believe in is more neutralized by my adoration for the way they look, the way they move and laugh and speak. So let's go more specifically into the blondness of the archetypal shiksa. So since shiksa technically refers to any non-Jewish woman, and like 98% of America is not Jewish, and within that 98%, it's extremely ethnically and racially diverse, why is the archetypal shiksa a blonde, white, blue-eyed woman? Well, this goes back to our theme of assimilation, as well as upward social mobility. I want to preface this by reminding everyone that Jews are incredibly diverse. There are Jewish people all over the world of all different races and ethnicities. Jews are not a monolith. There is no one way to look or be Jewish. But the specific trope in American media tends to be the dynamic of an Ashkenazi Jewish man and a WASP woman.
We're wasps. Wasps don't yell, it's genetic.
And if you don't know what that term means, it's white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. They are also stereotyped to be wealthy and well-connected.
Ever thought a shiksa goddess like you would fall for a putz like me?
This is because now in the present-day United States, Ashkenazi Jews are generally considered to be white Jews. That wasn't always the case. Whiteness historically has had fluidity to it. The ethnic groups that were considered socially to be white in America have changed over time. For example, Irish Americans and Italian Americans are very much considered white today, but throughout America's history, they have been discriminated against based on their ethnicity. We're definitely much more integrated into whiteness than 50 years ago when Portnoy's Complaint was written. This is another passage from Portnoy's Complaint. Don't tell me we're Americans just like they are. No. Those blonde-haired Christians are the legitimate residents and owners of this place. America is a shiksa nestling under your arm, whispering love, love, love. Portnoy even explicitly says that he believes that only someone who is Chinese would ever think of him as white. Okay, so I'm so sorry. I don't necessarily love talking about Woody Allen, but we have to talk about Woody Allen, because if Philip Roth cemented the modern shiksa goddess into literature, Annie Hall cemented it into film. If you don't know Annie Hall, it came out in 1977 and centers around Alvy and Annie, a troubled couple who is trying to figure out their relationship, played by Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. A theme running throughout the film is the contrast of Alvy's Jewishness and Annie's waspiness. One of the potential titles for the movie was Me and My Goy.
They really look American, they very healthy. They never get sick or anything. Nothing like my family. The two are like oil and water.
Let him drop dead. Who needs his business?
His wife has diabetes.
Alvi makes frequent comments about being attracted to her waspiness, loving that she has phrases like la-di-da, and compares her family to a Norman Rockwell painting. Norman Rockwell paintings frequently depicted an idealized version of white American middle-class life. A key note is within the very first minute of Annie Hall, Alvi says this:
I would never want to belong to any club that would have someone like me for a member. That's the key joke of my adult life in terms of my relationships with women.
Later on, as Alvi ponders on why he ended things with his first wife, who happened to be Jewish, he can't seem to find anything wrong with her, and repeats this line again about not wanting to belong to a club that would have him as a member. The day Alvi and Annie first meet, she says this about her grandmother.
You know what Grammy Hall would call a real Jew.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, she hates Jews.
When he eats dinner with her family, there's a hilarious visual gag where he imagines how he must look to her grandmother, where he appears as a Hasidic Jew. It's clear that Alvi doesn't feel he belongs in her world, but you wonder if that's part of the appeal for him, that maybe the country club her family would go to wouldn't allow him as a member. Another famous scene from the film is when Annie and him attempt to cook lobsters. Eating lobsters has become a popular trope in romance stories between Jews and Gentiles. This is because shellfish is not kosher, so lobster is one of the least Jewish foods you could eat, visually showing a culinary rejection of Jewish law.
You don't know how proud I am to think that I'm the man who introduced you to your first lobster.
Among other things.
Behave yourself.
Ow.
In Annie Hall, of course, there's a lot more to the dynamics of their relationship. This is a great film, and one of the most nuanced and detailed looks at a relationship in film. But this WASP/Jewish dichotomy helps solidify the way this trope would be displayed in pop culture. In the Los Angeles Review of Books, Menachem Kaiser breaks down the tenets of the stereotype. By the 1980s, what I'll call the Allen-esque Jew/Shiksa split was entrenched. Jewish equals non-athletic, brainy, neurotic, pasty, dark-haired, profoundly unhealthy parental relationship, usually for the New York area. Shiksa equals healthy, waspy, carefree, blonde, supportive, if judgmental, parents from the Midwest or from a home that might as well be in the Midwest. I do want to clarify though, of course, even though the term Shiksa has come a long way from calling non-Jewish women abomination bugs, that doesn't mean it's still not used in offensive or rude contexts in the modern day. There are Jews and non-Jews who consider the word distasteful. Also, some Jews may call other Jews shiksas as a judgment of them not being Jewish enough. So, with all this context in mind, let's circle back to Nobody Wants This, specifically all the think pieces and controversies surrounding the show's portrayal of Jewish women. Jessica Radloff, the senior West Coast editor at Glamour, said this about the show's portrayal of Jewish women. We come off as controlling, marriage-hungry women who want to plan dinner parties and alienate anyone who doesn't share those same dreams. And this isn't the only review where Jewish women remark similar perspectives on the show. I will say, watching the show, did I think the Jewish women were kind of stereotypical? Yeah, I'd say so. But was it surprising to me? Not really. Because honestly, in this type of Shiksa goddess story, the Jewish woman being portrayed as kind of obnoxious is a very common trope, if not the most common trope in this type of story. You see examples of this in 1972's The Heartbreak Kid. You especially see this in Keeping the Faith.
You are making me crazy, Rabbi.
You're making me so...
Just come up for me.
No.
Come on, 5 minutes.
Kids.
Just come on.
Ah! Are you okay? Good.
Oh, wow.
Go.
Hey.
Thanks, and wonderful time.
Keeping the Faith is almost the prototype for Nobody Wants This because it's literally about a priest and a rabbi who fall in love with and then fight over a Shiksa goddess. But if you're thinking about telling a Shiksa girl, Jewish boy love story, narrative-wise, it structurally makes sense. Like when you're writing a romantic lead, she normally falls into the trope that she's not like other girls, to set her apart because she's different, she's your leading lady. And in the Jewish boy perspective, all the other girls they know are Jewish girls. And if the stereotype for Jewish women is that they're loud, obnoxious, uptight, overbearing, then the Shiksa goddess is the opposite of that. She's laid back, she's spontaneous, she's chill, she's basically a cool girl. Shiksa is hot. Shiksa is gay. Shiksa is fun. Shiksa
never gets angry at her man.
Why does the Shiksa goddess trope particularly sting for Jewish women? Well, historically, Western beauty standards have plagued the psyches of Jewish women. In 1850, Scottish anthropologist Robert Knox described the Jewish feature as a large, massive, club-shaped, hooked nose 3 or 4 times larger than suits the face, concluding, the Jewish face can never be and never is perfectly beautiful. So, stereotypically Jewish features were declared medically ugly. Great. Also, Robert Knox turned out to be a eugenicist, surprise, surprise, and involved in a murder plot. But anyways, in the early 20th century, physicians argued that fixing these racial characteristics could result in improved patient well-being. Getting a nose job could give Jewish women, and men as well, but the practice is mostly done on Jewish women, a more white look. This could help them assimilate better into society, as well as into Eurocentric beauty standards.
Malibu Barbie is not pretty. I mean, she's just, basic. You know, she's just, generic looking. She's, generic pretty. She could possibly be the most beautiful person I've ever seen.
Also, I love how Diana Agron is often cast in these Shiksa goddess roles, and she herself is actually Jewish. Going to show again, there is no one way for Jews to look. I will say, for the girls who look Jewish, things have changed a lot since the 20th century. I mean, we're in a post-Barbra Streisand world, after all. But those negative feelings that some women have about their Jewish features have not completely gone away.
Are you suggesting that I get a nose job?
You're 16, right? That's when I gave my daughters theirs. It's like a rite of passage for Jewish girls.
Okay. First of all, I like how I look.
Is she your girlfriend?
No.
What does your girlfriend look like?
I'm guilty of these feelings as well. I don't really have a big nose, but I have a downward tip, so it is a Jewish-looking nose. And when I was a kid, I would stare in the mirror and then I'd push up slightly the tip of my nose and wonder what I'd look like with a button nose. And, when someone tells me that I look Jewish, my first impulse is to, smooth down my hair, So, I'm working on it. This is where we get into the more misogynistic aspects of the Shiksa goddess trope. In these stories, the Jewish women are positioned as less than to the Shiksa goddess, but the Shiksa goddess herself is being objectified by the Jewish men who desire her, or shallowly use her as a prize or status symbol. I think this is best shown in 1972's The Heartbreak Kid, in my opinion, the most self-aware Shiksa goddess movie. Its main character, Lenny, I personally consider the Patrick Bateman of nebbishy Jewish men. Also, the phrase, Shiksas are for practice, is said by Noah's mother in the show and joked about by his friends. This idea that Gentile women are sexually disposable is also, of course, misogynistic. This trope typically splits Jewish and non-Jewish women into this artificial divide. Jewish women are sexually rigid, unattractive, overbearing, but should be the mother of your children, their wife material. The Shiksas are laid back, fun, spontaneous, beautiful, but they aren't worth being serious about. They're just for fun. This perceived divide is, of course, inaccurate and has misogynistic implications for both sides. When it comes to these stereotypes, Nobody Wants This is kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes the show plays into this, like when Joanne or her sister Morgan walk into Jewish spaces, and the vibe is like when a bombshell walks into the villa.
This week, a hot new bombshell enters the villa. Don't call me up, I'm going out tonight, feeling...
Also, Joanne as a character is very much the laid-back, cool girl. I think of the episode where she and Noah get dinner with Esther, Sasha, and their daughter Miriam. Joanne, in an attempt to prove to her sister that she can be more like herself around Noah, opts to switch into sweats, while everyone else at the dinner dresses more formally. Almost bat mitzvah Miriam vocally admires Joanne and her coolness, to the annoyance of her mother Esther. Also, this video is not sponsored, but I felt like I should wear some Reformation because Joanne wears a lot of Reformation in the show, and it makes sense to me because Reformation's kind of known as the LA cool girl brand. Also, Noah's ex-girlfriend Rebecca snooping through Noah's stuff to put on the engagement ring without asking is very much a stereotype of how Jewish women are overbearing and obsessed with getting married. But sometimes the show does subvert these stereotypes. Joanne forms a jealous obsession over Rebecca, who is extremely beautiful. She particularly focuses on being jealous of Rebecca's thick, beautiful hair. Joanne throughout the show makes comments on her own insecurities about her hair. She disparages her thin hair and eyebrows, and when she goes through Rebecca's breakup box, she immediately begins to brush her hair with Rebecca's brush, displaying the jealous obsession on the features she perceives to be superior about Rebecca. And as a Jewish woman, I found it interesting that the hair was her focus. It reminds me of when I was growing up, I would always talk to the girls with straight hair and be like, oh, I wish my hair was straight like yours. And they would often reply that they wish they had curly hair like mine. Maybe it's because everyone wants what they can't have. Maybe it's because our natural features will never be enough for the mythical and ever-changing standard of beauty. I think about Tina Fey's essay, All Girls Must Be Everything, and I think about modern plastic surgery and filler trends where it's kind of picking and choosing a bunch of different ethnic features and mashing them together, you know? Creator Aaron Foster did actually respond to the criticism about the show's portrayal of Jewish women by saying this. I think we need positive Jewish stories right now. I think it's interesting when people focus on, oh, this is a stereotype of Jewish people, when you have a rabbi as the lead. A hot, cool, young rabbi who smokes weed. That's the antithesis of how people view a Jewish rabbi, right? If I made the Jewish parents like two granola hippies on a farm, then someone would write, I've never met a Jewish person like that before. You clearly don't know how to write Jewish people, you don't know what you're doing, and that doesn't represent us well. I get what she's saying. I don't know if this response really addressed the root of people's complaints, but honestly, I don't think she deserves the entirety of the blame. As I said before, these stereotypes are not new for this type of story, and honestly, many of these stereotypes about Jewish women were created by and then perpetuated by Jewish men. The show's creator, Erin Foster, is also Jewish herself. The story for Nobody Wants This is loosely inspired by her love story with her husband. He wasn't a rabbi, but he was Jewish and expressed that he wanted to marry a Jewish woman, so she converted to Judaism so they could be together. Also, his parents emigrated from the former Soviet Union to San Francisco in 1979, so it seems she definitely took inspiration from his parents' circumstances in creating Rabbi Noah's parents. In her response article, she also acknowledges that she understands it's a different experience to grow up Jewish. Therefore, heading into the writer's room, she said she purposely surrounded herself with colleagues who were born Jewish. So, from my understanding, there were multiple Jewish writers in the writing room that gave input on writing the show. So, was I personally upset watching the show? While I do understand the concerns that some Jewish women had about the show, I wasn't really personally upset. I think I would be more if I felt there was a lack of positive representation for Jewish women in film and TV, and this was our only source of representation. But I definitely feel that our community very much differs from, say, Asian Americans, Indigenous Americans, or Arab Americans who really only began to more recently receive positive and complex mainstream representation and definitely still need much more. I specifically want to give a shout out to Rami Youssef's TV show, Rami, because I feel the show explores the similarities in religion and culture between observant Muslims and Orthodox Jews. And neither categories are often represented in American media. In general, I do feel there is an abundance of Jewish representation in TV and film. Though Jews do not control the media, Jewish immigrants were a part of the development and foundation of the film and television industry, which allowed the privilege of having some say in the way we were represented in TV and film. Though it was at first mostly Jewish men, there have still been over the years quite a lot of positive representation for Jewish women. I grew up watching The Nanny on Nick at Night, and Fran Fine is a funny, beautiful, and very Jewish woman. She was also extremely desirable to every man she came across. On sick days as a kid, I would watch Funny Girl with my mom, and as an adult, there are a lot of shows out there that I love that are created by Jewish creators and portray complex Jewish women and non-binary Jews. A few examples I've seen include Broad City, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Transparent, and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So while I found some of the Jewish women on the show to be kind of stereotypical and maybe a little outdated for 2024, I did feel like there is potential for them to become more three-dimensional as the show goes on in season 2. Esther, I'd say, is the most prominent Jewish woman on the show, and while she started off very stereotypical, especially when it came to the dynamic of her and her husband, I felt over the course of the season she started to become more three-dimensional to me. I loved her dynamic with Bina as she was promoted to being the good daughter-in-law, and I loved her connecting with her daughter when she was upset at her bat mitzvah. Now that the show is renewed for season 2, I feel the next step should be to continue to flesh out and add complexity to the Jewish women on the show. Okay, second controversy. It is unrealistic for Joanne to grow up in LA and know literally nothing about Jewish people. Okay, yeah, I do agree that it is definitely unrealistic. She knows nothing about Jewish people when living in LA, the city with the second highest Jewish population in the country.
It's not us.
It's not?
No.
Honestly, though, I don't really mind it. I mean, one, I personally found it hilarious how unaware she was, and 2, it actually makes sense for the show. I can tell that they're trying to appeal to a wide audience including both Jewish people and non-Jews, so I think they understood there might be viewers who know nothing about Judaism, giving them an opportunity to teach them what Shalom means, or what Shabbat is, or how our holidays start and end at sundown. Season 1 just felt like Judaism 101 to me. I understand the show's creators had a rabbinical consult there as well. And honestly, because of the structure of Rabbi Noah teaching Joanne about Judaism, I think they create some really nice moments. Like them having their first Shabbat together is so sweet. And when he explained they were beshert, I'll admit I teared up a little. I'm such a sucker for a good beshert line. So let's talk about the ending and what that might mean for season 2, because this, surprise surprise, had controversy. So Rabbi Noah is up for a big promotion, but the obstacle is it's implied that he wouldn't receive the promotion to head rabbi with a Shiksa goddess at his arm. Specifically, the current rabbi tells him that if he marries a goy, then everyone marries a goy, and then there are no more Jewish children, and then our people become extinct. This point of view is definitely a point of view of some Jewish individuals and organizations, but it's a point I personally don't agree with, and I feel it's becoming increasingly antiquated. According to the Pew Research Center, 42% of all currently married Jewish respondents indicate that they have a non-Jewish spouse, and among those who have gotten married since 2010, 61% are intermarried. I don't believe this means Jews are going extinct. I think it just means we're adjusting the rigid definition of who gets to be Jewish, which brings me to my next point. You must be wondering, Hallie, you've been talking a lot about the Jewish man, Gentile woman combo. Is there any heat for the Jewish woman, Gentile man combo? So going back to shtetl times, interfaith marriages were a big no-no, no matter the gender. One of the most famous examples of this in film is actually in Fiddler on the Roof, where the youngest daughter, Chava, falls for a non-Jew and then is shunned by her father.
Papa, I beg you to accept us.
But when it comes to interfaith couples having children specifically, Judaism has historically followed a matrilineal lineage, meaning if the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish, but if the mother is not Jewish, the child is not Jewish, even if the father is Jewish. Thus, it's a common practice for Gentile women to convert to Judaism when they want to marry a Jewish man. But that's generally not the same expectation for Gentile men.
What is his deal? Is he single?
Yes, but he's not Jewish.
Whatever.
Don't your parents care about that?
Does he vote Democrat and have a job?
Yes.
Well, the kids will be Jewish anyway. I'm gonna go ask him to buy me dinner. Okay.
However, there are multiple denominations of Judaism that each follow different rules. In 1968, Reconstructionist Judaism approved bilineal descent, meaning that children of one Jewish parent, regardless of the gender, are considered Jewish if raised as Jews. In 1983, the Reform movement adopted a similar policy. Also, most Reform rabbis do perform interfaith marriages. The largest 3 denominations of Judaism in America today are Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. And nobody wants this, it's not explicit what movement Rabbi Noah's congregation follows. But because of his comment that he can perform gay marriages, but is not allowed to perform interfaith marriages, and because both conservative and Orthodox rabbis are not permitted to perform interfaith weddings, but many conservative rabbis do perform gay marriages, this makes me assume that the congregation is a conservative one, though it's not officially said and some of the practices do cross over to Reform. This brings me to the cliffhanger of Nobody Wants This. Joanne decides that she isn't ready to commit to converting to Judaism and doesn't want to hold Noah back from his dream position, so she lets him go. He dramatically chases her down and they share a kiss. He seems to understand that he can't have both. But is this true that rabbis are not allowed to be in interfaith marriages? Well, independent, humanist, renewal, and reconstructionist denominations do allow for rabbis and spiritual leaders to be married to non-Jews. And just this year, Hebrew Union College, the Reform Movement's rabbinical seminary, officially dropped the ban on ordaining and admitting students in interfaith relationships. I predict we'll start to see more openness to interfaith couples in Judaism, both for the congregants and rabbis. And I personally like that. I think the desire to continue the next generation of Jews in Judaism doesn't need to be linked and tied to the conformity of parentage. I feel emphasis on an open and welcoming community where parents that want to raise their kids Jewish should be able to raise their kids Jewish without so much red tape and restriction on those who are giving birth. I think wanting to convert to Judaism is a beautiful thing, and I feel taking the pressure off of people to convert to Judaism to conform to certain laws will just allow them to have a more spiritual and personal connection with Judaism on their own pace. This opens up some interesting paths for season 2. If we're going off the real-life story that the show is based on, Joanne will probably end up deciding to convert to Judaism. However, we aren't really sure if this will be the path of the show or what the timeline will be, considering Rabbi Noah's promotion is on the line. He seems to have made a choice to go after her that means risking the promotion or even his career as a rabbi. As for next season, I'm curious to see where this takes his career next. It would be really interesting to me if they confirm that his congregation is conservative and then he begins to apply for positions at other synagogues that are alternative denominations that will accept their interfaith relationship. It could be cool to see a show this mainstream that goes more into the nuanced details of the Jewish community. But I don't know, we just learned Shalom in season 1, so maybe it's baby steps. Whatever it is, I'm definitely tuning in. So this is my 4th full-length video essay on YouTube, so I really appreciate you tuning in and sticking this long around. So since I'm a new channel, if you can subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Like, especially at this stage, every subscription really counts. Yeah, and if you want more content from me, I have a TikTok as well, where I have a lot more short form videos on there. So feel free to check those out, and thank you for sticking through.